Previously on the history of id Software, we witnessed how a young, aspiring group of game developers had their first major breakthrough, fueled by a groundbreaking programming technology pioneered by John Carmack and with the help of a radical new internet-only distribution model provided by Scott Miller from Apogee Software. Commander Keen was the game that finally liberated the personal computer from its shackles of being a technologically inferior gaming platform, and after its huge commercial success, the guys founded their own company, id Software. Today, we'll continue on their journey towards becoming some of the most famous and renowned stars of the industry. So without further ado, my name is Ragnar and this is the history of id Software. After the overwhelming success of Commander Keen, the team that was now id Software couldn't wait to get busy on making new and better games for Apogee. There was just one problem remaining. They were still under contract for Softdisk, and the guys had developed Commander Keen on their employer's hardware and distributed it through Apogee Software, while completely neglecting to give Softdisk their fair share of the profits. In fear of a legal nightmare, they took the initiative and offered their old employer to keep developing one game every 2 months for a salary of $5,000 until they were freed from their contractual obligations. Luckily, Softdisk agreed. That extra workload couldn't stop id from making games for Scott Miller. And why would they? With Apogee, they could make a fortune. They instantly began working on the second Commander Keen trilogy, this time dedicating almost a full year to its development. The programmers, John Carmack and John Romero, further enhanced the engine, implementing 256-color VGA graphics, a more fluent and dynamic animation system, and a plethora of other technical improvements. Adrian Carmack, the team's artist, once stated that he feels somewhat ashamed for his artwork in the first Keen trilogy. Not for the second one though. Its fluidly animated cartoon style, the shift to an orthographic perspective, and the loving attention to detail that went into each one of the hand-drawn sprites makes it, even from a modern perspective, still pleasant to look at. In the meantime though, programming genius John Carmack had set his gaze on a new challenge. Inspired in part by games like Wing Commander and prominently a looking glass tech demo for the upcoming Ultima Underworld, he reckoned that the third dimension held a lot of untapped potential for the future of video games. It was not a brand new idea though. There had been a lot of 3D games in the early 80s or even before, like the procedurally generated Elite or games like Rescue on Fractalis and the Eidolon by Lucasfilm Games, among many others. Chris Roberts' Wing Commander, however, had made it look really impressive. By making the player experience the action directly through the eyes of the protagonist, it had come closer to spatial immersion than anything before. What bugged Carmack though was that these games were slow and felt unresponsive, because rendering 3D graphics in real time put a huge burden on the computer's hardware. And once again, by cutting away all the unnecessary dead weight, he found a way to do it better. If 3 dimensions were too much to handle for contemporary processors, one could stick with just the X and Y axis and ignore the Z axis, which would exponentially reduce the operations necessary to process the environment. In the next 6 weeks, as always next to his regular work, Carmack wrote a pseudo 3D raycasting engine that emits 1 ray per column of pixels over a 2D map and draws walls, floors, and ceilings via a one-dimensional depth buffer. The result allowed the player to navigate through a 3-dimensional space with unprecedented speed and responsiveness, and when he showed it to his colleagues, they were fascinated and eager to put it to good use. And that's exactly what they did. They developed id Software's first 3D shooter. You've all been waiting for this, right? Of course, Hovertank 3D. What, you expect something else? I mean, Hovertank 3D was... In Hovertank 3D, players were sent through, well, 3D maze-like structures while shooting mutants, dueling enemy tanks, and rescuing civilians from a nuclear attack. And where games like Wing Commander were only able to run at around 12 frames per second, even on cutting-edge hardware of the time, Hovertank ran incredibly fast even on weaker machines, nothing even remotely compared in terms of speed and responsiveness. The only problem was that the game was released by Softdisk, which prevented it from spreading through the internet in the same way Commander Keen had, due to the magazine's very limited subscriber base. Nevertheless, the guys knew that they were onto something substantial with this technology and kept improving it for their next title, once again released through Softdisk only a month later. It was Catacomb 3D, and it iterated on the first-person perspective concept by taking the player out of the vehicle and making them walk through the monster-filled mazes, experiencing the action through the eyes of a mage while casting spells with his hand right in front of him. When Scott Miller played this game, he was awestruck by this new technology as well as this new genre's potential, and subsequently urged the guys at id Software to make a similar game for his company. It was a no-brainer, and John Romero already knew where the road would lead them. Since its inception, he had been a huge fan of Castle Wolfenstein, a series of roguelikes in which the player takes on the role of a POW, escaping a castle full of Nazi soldiers during World War II. He had even teased his intention to, one day, in his words, rewrite Castle Wolfenstein, by arranging pipes in the form of a swastika hidden in the overworld of Commander Keen 5, as an Easter egg. To his amazement, he had just found out that the game's developer studio, Muse Software, had been shut down due to bankruptcy in 1987 and missed the trademark registration phase for the Wolfenstein IP, which meant that it was now public domain and free for everyone to use. So id Software pitched to craft a 3D remake of Castle Wolfenstein to Apogee Software. Scott Miller was so infatuated with the idea that he instantly agreed and promised them a salary of $100,000 upon delivery. The team, who had just moved their quarters from Louisiana to Wisconsin, immediately got to work. The only downside was that Tom Hall, who was primarily in charge of game design, wasn't entirely happy with the idea of developing a violent game in which the player shot people from a first-person perspective. For Romero, however, it was right up his alley, and he was bursting with ideas, which made him gradually transition from programmer to lead designer of the project. Most video game violence so far was depicted in a cartoonish and abstract way. Wolfenstein would be completely different. A brutally violent blood orgy with viscerally animated blood and gore, with fast and relentless firefights from start to finish. It would also be the first id Software game to feature digitally sampled sound effects, which made gunshots sound more authentic than ever before and even enabled the player to hear dying enemies cry out in agony and beg for their life. Wolfenstein 3D was eventually released on May 5th, 1992, and it took the gaming world by storm. To put its commercial success into perspective, all 6 Commander Keen games combined had earned between $10,000 and $30,000 a month so far. Wolfenstein brought in over $200,000 a month for more than 1.5 years. It was fresh, exciting, edgy, and played like nothing else before, and Apogee's brilliant shareware distribution model ensured it became one of the fastest spreading pieces of software of that time. Its acclaim firmly established Carmack and Romero's names among game developers, so much so that programmers from everywhere sought out Carmack's technical advice. He eventually licensed the Wolfenstein engine for others to use with their own projects, which marked the first time in id Software's history in which they earned money not from making games, but from providing a toolset for other developers. And it wouldn't be the last time. Wolfenstein was ported to over a dozen different systems and consoles, including Nintendo's SNES. Yes, even Nintendo, the family-friendly company who had rejected the guy's pitch for a PC version of Mario 3 a few years prior, now almost begged them to make a version for the Super Nintendo. Without blood, with giant rats instead of guard dogs, and without the famous final boss battle against Adolf Hitler, with Gatling guns. But while the game received universal acclaim everywhere and Wolfenstein clones were popping out of every developer's orifice, the guys at id Software were already working on their next game. And even though it was still in its early development stages, John Carmack already knew what it would be called. Doom. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something useful. If so, then please give it a like, share it on your favorite social medias, and subscribe to my channel for more video game history in the future. Follow me on Facebook for news and updates, and if you want to support me with my endeavors, then you'd make me very happy with a small contribution on Patreon. My name is Ragnar, and I'll see you next time on RagnarRox.